Okay, we are here. This is NYJavaSIG, and this is our workshop for April 2022. Before I begin, let me remind you that we have meetings every month. We have workshops every 2-3 months. Be sure to join us. I'm going to admit another person into the room. And join us on, I'm going to point here, javasig.com. That's our webpage. And please follow us on Twitter. And I'm going to do that over here. That's NYJavaSIG. And you can join our mailing list and get all the information about what we're doing, when we're doing it. If you're in the New York City area, we will be starting to meet live at some point in the near future. I plan to raffle off a free license for IntelliJ later on in the meeting, so please stick around for that. And then what I want to do, you know, they always say without further ado, so here's a little bit of further ado. The further ado is that I'm going to introduce our speaker. Before I do, I just want to tell you that this is an interactive session. Now, if you're joining us on YouTube, you're going to be limited to typing things into the chat. But if you're joining us on Zoom, then please, Andres told me before we started that he wants this to be an interactive session. Feel free to ask questions at any time. Feel free to try what he's doing, follow along with him, work with him, ask questions, type them in the chat, or even better yet, unmute yourself and chime in. Right, Andres?
That's correct.
All right. Okay. We're going to talk about JReleaser. Oh boy, oh boy. Andres Almiray is our speaker today. He is a Java Groovy developer and a Java champion with more than 20 years of experience in software design and development. He is a true believer in open source and has participated in popular projects, Groovy, Griffon, DbUnit, and starting his own projects. He's a founding member of the Griffon framework, Hackergarten community event, and guess what? Creator of JReleaser. Andres, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Barry, and thank you everyone else for joining us today. And if you happen to be watching the recording later, I hope that you can also follow some of the hands-on examples that we're going to see today. So the tool that we're going to experience today is called JReleaser. And for those that are watching the stream, I guess I should share my screen now.
In parallel so that you can get even more benefits. So,
okay. So we're going to talk about this tool called JReleaser. The idea behind this tool is very basically, if you are building a project that may or may not have binaries, and would you like to publish a release for say project, then JReleaser can do most of the work for you. If you happen to have binaries, then JReleaser can enhance your release process by also publishing the binaries to different package managers, typically SDKman, Homebrew, Scoop, create Docker images, and you can also announce your project to many distribution channels like Twitter, Zulip, SDKman, Slack, Teams, so many others. Now, the point is the tool is highly configurable, is really flexible, so that your release process, if you already have one, may be enhanced or adapted using the tool. It's not the other way around. The tool doesn't say, here's how you do it, and you have to break down your release process and figure out a way to put the two things together. It's actually, you already have something that is working, and you may want to just change a few things, then the tool, JReleaser, can help you in those particular areas. Okay. This is the NYJavaSIG. Obviously, the tool is built with Java, and you can use the tool to release any kind of project, not just Java. And as I said earlier, you can also release projects that may not have binaries. So I'm going to post a link for the instructions that we're going to follow today. So this is a guest with the instructions. I'm going to post it in the chat so you can see it quickly. Where is the chat? There we go.
And I'm going to remind people who are watching on Zoom that they won't see these postings. Wait, let me start that sentence again. I'm going to remind people who are watching on YouTube that they won't see the postings that we put on Zoom, but what I'll do is try to copy them onto YouTube as we go.
Right. Thank you very much, Barry. So the first thing will be this URL when we had the gist with the instructions. So we need a set of prerequisites in order to do the hands-on experience for today. The first thing that you need is a way to install the tool. There are many ways. My preferred way is to use an SDK-man, which is a package manager. There are other versions, there are other ways to install JReleaser. If you were to browse to the GitHub page for the project on JReleaser, we browse there. There are a series of steps that you can follow to install the CLI. So if you want, you're on Mac on Linux, then use Homebrew. If you're on Windows and you have a scope, then it's as easy as this. SDK-man works for pretty much all major platforms, Linux, Windows, and Mac. If you have JBank installed, JBank can be installed in many ways, SDK-man being one of those as well. So this is how you run it. And if you're on Mac, you can use Mac ports if you want to. On Windows, you can use Chocolatey. And Linux, you may use Flatpak or Snapcraft or even an app image. And let's say the easiest way, the one that doesn't require any kind of package manager is just issue these calls, like download a jar from this location. And then you can supply a particular version here when you run it. So say, for example, you say latest or say 100, which is currently the latest release. And they just run any arguments. Which with this particular thing, what it does is actually connect to the release page of the project and locate the actual zip file and download it. So it's as easy as that. For some of these installation methods, you require a version of Java to be already installed in your system. For example, in the case of Homebrew, it's not. It comes in with a bundled JRE. For Scoop and SDK-man, you require Java 8, which pretty much everyone is. If you're still running Java 7, I will strongly recommend you to at least migrate to 8. If not, migrate to 11 or 17. And I think it's only these two options that require a pre-installed version of Java. And every other one will just use one that is pre-installed. I mean, it will be actually pre-bundled with the binary. And that would be the first step that we need to figure out, how to get the tool into your system. So you have various choices. If I were to do this with SDK-man, let's switch into the terminal, and I can ask SDK-man for the list of versions that are available in JReleaser. So right now I have all of these versions installed in my system. And the latest one, the current one that is selected is 100. Yeah, I'm still working on the next snapshot, but we should be using 100 today. So if I have this installed correctly, and I ask JReleaser for its version, it should say something like this. So with this, we can verify which version we have, when it was built, and in which revision. So if you were to be consuming another different version of JReleaser, those values will be different, of course. But if it happens to be this version, but these values are different, this is how we can tell this is not the real JReleaser that was published in a particular day and time. Okay. So I'm going to give a few minutes for people to finish this task, because without having JReleaser installed, then everything else will just won't work. Later in the workshop, we will see another way to use JReleaser without having to install the CLI. So being able to use the CLI from the get-go will give us a feeling of how the tool works and what are the things that we can do with it. And then later we jump into proper integration with Maven, which I suppose most people will be familiar with. If you happen to use or prefer other build tools, just such as Gradle, we also have a way for you to consume JReleaser from Gradle as a plugin. Okay, so we have a few people in the room with us, and just gonna wait a couple more minutes. And please let me know if you have JReleaser already installed, if you were successful completing this task, or if there is something that needs to be addressed to get you across that line. So here we go. You can go to github.com JReleaser, and you can find a list of different options. Or if you have SDK-man installed already, then, oh, this should have been just SDK install JReleaser. Typo there. We can fix it. Just go there, edit, and say this actually the command is SDK. Update it. There we go. Now it should be fine. There's no mentions in the chat. So I hope that this is going all right. Let's move this window to this other location. Much better. And then let's put it over there. Great. The other thing that we're going to need today is each one of you should have a GitHub account, because what we're going to do is post a release or a series of releases to a GitHub repository of your choice. JReleaser works with GitHub, GitLab, and Gitya. If you want to use GitLab or Gitya instance, then you will have to create a token or an access token for that particular service. For now, I'm assuming that most people are familiar with GitHub or have a GitHub account. So the next step will be creating an access token so that we can interact, each one of you can interact with GitHub. There is a link here in the gist that goes directly into the documentation of GitHub that tells you exactly how you can create it. The way that the code repository that we're going to use later is set up, we may need to write to a different repository, not just the one that currently hosts your code. In order to do that, this is what step number 3 says. When you create your access token, you have the option to select many different permissions. What we need is a token with full read and write access to your username or to your organization. Every other permission that you will see in the list when you create the access token is not needed. So only you make sure that you have full read write access. If we don't, when we try to create a Homebrew formula, then we will get a failure. That's also one thing that could happen. If you don't care about Homebrew at this point, then just create a personal access token with the default permissions, and that should work fine. How are we doing with the JReleaser installation? Feel free to just post in the chat or put an emoji. I think you can do that now in Zoom. So just to figure out if we have finished with this task. So Darren is good. Thank you, Darren. Yeah, we just have to wait a few more minutes for the others to finish this task.
For people who are too shy to unmute themselves or type in the chat, you can find emojis down in the reactions.
Yeah.
part.
Yeah, that's also another quick way to find out if we can continue with the next step.
I'm always slow in following instructions like this, so
Well, so
probably I would, yeah. If I were daring to try to participate now, which I can't because I'm too busy managing the session, I would probably be one of these people who wasn't willing to tell you that I was behind. Too shy to do so. But anyway.
Thanks, Barry. Let's see. So I guess if you're not using SDK man, and if we go to JReleaser, we click on the latest release 1.0.0, scroll down on the changelog until we find the list of different assets and binaries that we can use. So here we go. This is the universal zip. You require a custom Java, you require a Java runtime to run this. It's just Java 8 or plus. Or depending on your platform, you may download each one of this. So if you're an Intel or an ARM or an Linux or Windows or Mac, probably most likely will use this version when the version of or your operating system is using glibc. Or if you happen to use Muscle, which is the case for Alpine Linux, then you will go with this one. Alternatively, you may want to use the installer that works for Linux. This is for Mac. These two are for Linux, and this one is for Windows. So it just installs the CLI and comes with a bundled Java runtime. So that should also be simple. Depending on your Windows settings, using the installer may cause trouble with access permissions to files. So just be aware of that. And it might also ask you if you trust the provider, because these files have not been signed yet. So if you don't want to do that, that's okay. You can use the other options. So download each one of this or this one, and it should be good to go. So I hope that most people have already across this task. The next one is creating that access token. This is the thing that will allow us to interact with GitHub and be able to post our release. We can use JReleaser without a valid token. There are many things that we can do with JReleaser, but the actual thing that the tool does, which is post a release, won't be possible unless we have a valid token. So when we click on this arrow, it navigates to the documentation, how you can create a token. And I guess everyone should have a valid email address associated with their account. And it says, go to developer settings, create a personal access token, and then just generate that particular token. Once you generate that token, you will see the content, the value of that token, which is something like GHG and a bunch of characters, and it's a string of letters and numbers and some special characters. That is the value of the token that we need to save somewhere. Be sure that you copy the value of that token. If you navigate away from that page that generates the token, you won't be able to see the value again. If you don't copy the value or you lost it, then that's not a problem. You can just, what is the call? You can revoke access to that particular token and then delete it and create a new one. So don't worry too much if for some reason you were not able to save the value of that token. Another thing that could happen is that you already have a token, you already have a value somewhere, so there's no need to create a new one. And the last bit that we're going to do is save that token in a particular configuration file. The default location for the configuration file and default name is .JReleaser at your user home, and the name of the file is config.properties. There are other formats where we're going to stick with properties for the time being. So for Linux and Mac, you go into your user home. For Windows, it's a different path. You still have to use a .JReleaser directory. This is regardless of the platform. Just make it a standard Java properties file and with the name config properties. We should have just a single entry in that file. The key should be JReleaser GitHub token, all in caps with underscore separating each word, equals then the value of that token that you copied. So be sure again to remember that value. If you lost it, just revoke the token and start over and create a new token. Right? So this may take us a few more minutes, given that in order to complete this task, we have to navigate to the settings for each one of your account, find developer settings and create an access token. That is, if we go to GitHub, it says go to the settings, so that will be here, and then look for developer settings, which is at the bottom of your profile. Click there, and then personal access tokens, click there, and I have plenty of tokens here. So what we need to do is generate a new token. Well, you have to be logged in this case, and what we need is this permissions, everything together. Everything else, just leave it out. There's no need. There's no need to set up the other permissions. And here we can say something like New York JavaSIG, whatever name you want to give it. Generate a token, and yeah, this token is going to be automatically revoked because it's going to be in the recording. So there we go. Just be sure to copy that value, and because the moment that you browse away, you won't see it. So click here to copy that value. And now for myself, I'm just going to delete it. So that token completely gone, invalid. No one can use it. Once you have that value, you go into your home. Oh, I already have that file. So we can say something like this. Oh no, I can say my user home.JReleaser config.properties and put JReleaser GitHub token and the token value, the thing that we copied over. Of course, this is an invalid value. It's okay. And that's it. And this is everything that we need to do in order to complete this particular task. I don't need this file because I use a different version, but so that's okay. So don't delete it yourself. Just delete it for myself. So we should be here in this setup. Please let me know if you were able to successfully complete these tasks. Once we're done, then thank you, Darren. And then we can continue with the actual hands-on. So there's a little bit of setup, of course, but once we're done, we will be able to reuse these settings for any other kind of release process that you want to follow. As we continue adding features into your release process, you will find out that there are other secrets or other sensitive data that you would like to keep out from the configuration file. We haven't seen it yet. This is the configuration of the model that JReleaser will use. So when that happens, when that is the case, when you need more secrets, like the GitHub token, then my recommendation is to write them down into the config properties file. Or you can also set them as environmental variables. So the reason I chose to showcase the config properties is that this is much easier if you're working on Windows, because then you have to modify the environments and then open a new terminal so that the environment is ready. In this case, is much faster. Okay.
While
Yes.
people are working, I'm curious for anyone who wants to type into the chat, let us know what platform you're using. Are you using Windows, Mac, Linux? If so, what flavors of each?
Right. Thank you very much for that comment, Barry. The tool works on all major platforms, though, like with almost every single Java application that works on Windows, we always have to deal with the way that paths are handled, which is sadly, someone decided to use the / instead of the /, and that kind of causes a little bit of trouble when we're writing values and we are not taking into account how paths should be handled.
Now,
So if anyone is on Windows and gets stuck with a path, let me know.
Now I've seen instances where Windows accepts the / as opposed to the \. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yes.
Who knows? You just got to be careful.
Yes, exactly. I know for a fact that handling paths in Java using the glob syntax to do like a file system search, you have to explicitly define the backslashes on Windows and / on Linux and Mac. I don't know why. I would have expected the Java parser, whatever is going into the covers of NIO, to do the proper path handling, but it's not the case, or at least I was not able to find it very quickly or very easily. So of course, JReleaser has a way to do this, but just in case that is, if something were to happen, like, oh, JReleaser doesn't find the path, then we just can figure out what we can do. So most of the times it should work without any problems. Okay, so I'm hoping that by now we're able to finish these two tasks. So one is installing JReleaser with many different ways, and the other is having a GitHub token to continue. If for whatever reason you are not able to create a GitHub token, that's all right. Just be sure to create a config properties with this entry, even if it's an invalid token. We only need a non-bland token at this point. All right. So let's go. We're going to the first hands-on, which is create an autoconfig release. The idea behind this task is showcase how the tool can be used to create a Git release for any project that you may be working on. This project may be Java-based, or maybe JavaScript, or Perl, PHP, Python, Rust, whatever it is. The point is that you have something for which you want to create a Git release. That means there is a tag, there is a release title, there is a release body, which will typically be based on a changelog. And the changelog will be automatically created based on the commits that you have made to the repository. And if the project happens to have binaries, then we can also attach those binaries as release assets. There are additional bits that we can do with those binaries. For example, we can create checksums. We can create digital signatures using PGP or Project C-Store's cosign, and a few other things that we can do. But for now, we're going to start small. In order to make sure that everyone has the same experience, my recommendation is follow these steps. And then later on, as we have more time, you can experiment with your own projects if you want to. To begin with, just open a terminal or a shell if you don't have one already. This is where you will be able to run JReleaser and verify that it's the right version. And then go into GitHub, navigate to this repository. Is my username, Almiray, and the name of this repository is app. This is a very trivial Maven-based project that just happens to have basic CLI. Is when you run the CLI, it simply says hello world. That's it. So what we want with this is fork that repository and then clone it into your local environment. Why do we want to fork it? Because if you want to make changes to the configuration and you want to post to a release to the repository, it better be one which your release token, your GitHub token, have access to. If you just clone this one, my repository, you won't be able to post any releases. But if you fork it to your username and then clone it, then you will be able to create releases to your own copy of this repository. So just go there, fork it, and once you're done, just clone it. This funny thing here that I noticed recently is that even though I am the owner of this project and I want to create a copy, I cannot fork it. Say there should be an option here, say, I want to fork to app2 or whatever name. I want to fork to foo. I can't. I have to go around and do a funky thing in order to create a copy of this project into GitHub. But you, as a user that is not associated with this repository or this account, can simply click on the fork button and boom, you're done.
Could I make a quick recommendation?
Yes.
On step 6, since you already have Maven W set up in the repository, once you change the Maven verify in 6 to /Maven W.
To use the Maven wrapper. Yes. Thank you very much, Darren, for that.
Right. That way we don't have to, in the pre-work, we were supposed to install 384, which already had 385, but then the project has 363 in it. So
yeah, right.
Small thing.
Yeah, first thing, I should have used the Maven wrapper. Secondly, I should have updated the wrapper to at least 384. There was an issue with 385 and resolving dependencies with the dependency management block. That's the reason why I do not encourage you to upgrade to 385. 386 is coming up in the next couple of weeks, if I'm not mistaken, with a fix with that issue. So if you want to stay with the latest Maven, do it with 384 for the time being. And one of the reasons why I forgot about the Maven wrapper. So here's a project that is currently cloned. You can see it here is that particular remote. That's my repository. The reason why I completely forgot about the wrapper is that I don't use the wrapper directly to invoke Maven. I cheat a little bit. I use another tool called GUM, which allows me to do this. I know there is no build step in Maven. There is no build lifecycle. This project does not have any fancy plugin that will be able to resolve to something that is called build. This is coming from the GUM tool. What GUM tool does, besides finding if you have the Maven wrapper or the Maven command, is also provide mappings to typical tasks of goals that you may be using. In my case, I write and I use projects with both Maven and Gradle. So when you want to build with Gradle, you will typically do Gradle or Gradle W do build. And when you build with Maven, you do Maven or Maven W and verify. But if you keep switching with one another, it's very likely that at some point you're going to type Maven build, and that of course is not going to work. Or you're going to do Gradle W verify, and that is very likely to fail. Well, so what GUM does is that I got you. If your project happens to be Maven, then it will also this particular, it will do the mapping. So in this case, what is happening, you see here, GUM invokes the Maven wrapper for that POM file and does everything I want to, which is in this case, run all the way to verify. If I want to be really explicit of what's happening, you can tell that I can do the following. Just pass an additional flag that GUM has for debug. And that tells me exactly what's going to happen, which is you run Maven with these arguments. You can see it's calling verify. So that's basically what this little tool does. So thank you very much for that, Darren. I will be sure to update the instructions. So if we will follow the steps that says once we have forked the repository and change into that directory, we can issue this command, JReleaser release autoconfig project version 100. I'm going to do this right now without the project version. I will expect a failure. So let's see. Why there should be a failure? Because I haven't defined what project version we're going to release. What's happening here with these settings, we're asking JReleaser to gather information about your project, gathering metadata from somewhere. That location will be your Git directory. And with this information, we can tell what's the name of the repository or the name of the project, who's the owner, what will be the default remote. And if you happen to use a different remote name other than origin, we can also change that with an environmental variable, but we just follow the defaults, it should be fine. It should also know what is the default branch. In this case, will be main. And what else do we know about your project? We got the GitHub token, so that's good. And if I click here and say release autoconfig, I think it should fail because I didn't provide a version number. And this is exactly what it's telling me. Well, you could define an environmental variable like JReleaser project version. Or if we were looking to the help for this command, JReleaser release, like this, -H, somewhere here, here's a section for the autoconfig options, which is activated by passing autoconfig, which we did. As part of the different options here, we look down here, there is project version. So we can pass the project version as part of the parameters. So we can do that. We do autoconfig and then project version 100. And once you do this, what is going to happen is that JReleaser will attempt to create a Git release on your repository. If you have a valid GitHub token, then this should work, and it should look like this. Just a moment. There. So we can tell that JReleaser says which version it is. So this is going to verify, yeah, we're using the right version. This is regardless of how you consume JReleaser, whether you use it as a Maven plugin or a Gradle plugin, Docker image, whatever it is, it will always print out which version you are using. So you can tell that, yeah, that's the version that I want to use. It tells us that it has autoconfigure on with these different settings. So this is the current directory where I have cloned my repository. Yeah, that works. And this is the argument that I passed in the command line. So that matches. It's loading my settings or my secrets from this location. I know that I told you to use config.properties. In my case, I go with a different format, which is TOML. You can use 4 different formats: properties, YAML, TOML, or JSON. The only reason I chose to go with TOML is that I have more secrets. And some of those secrets have multiple lines in their value. So TOML and YAML have very good support for multi-line strings. I prefer to go with TOML just because, to try it out, as a matter of fact. Then we keep seeing more information about the log. So yes, the project version is set to 100. It's not a snapshot. That means that this version does not end on -snapshot, all caps. Although, if you want to use a different tag to determine if, or a different way to determine if the current version is snapshot or not, you can also configure. So -snapshot is just the default. This is the current time, which is a bit late on my time because I'm streaming from Switzerland. The current commit is this one. I have running on a Mac, which happens to be Intel. Dry run is set to false. That means that I'm going to really try to push a release to GitHub. If I were to set the dry run flag to true, then JReleaser will go through the motions and download and affect everything from remote, just pulling information, but it will not push. So when you're on dry run, there is nothing that's going to be changed or any remote servers or any remote resources. Everything just happens locally. It generates the changelog. If I showed you in a moment the Git commits, you will see how they look like and then how the changelog was generated. There are no input binaries, so there are no checksums to be calculated. There, again, for no input binaries, there are no digital signatures. There is no additional upload mechanism, so we're not going to upload to J4 Artifactory or Amazon S3 or something else. And then it does create a release to this particular location, which is the one that we, and in this case, should be your repository that you forked. And at the end, we have 2 additional files that we can see. One that contains all the properties that were evaluated by JReleaser, such as what's the current hash, the version of Java that you used to run it, in which platform, and the name of the project. Some of these values were resolved during the evaluation of your model. So if you have an additional step after the release, where these values may be needed, then you can consume them from this particular place. The other file is a trace log, which contains everything that JReleaser did, the log, but in debug mode. So it doesn't matter if you are running your command in quiet mode, you can you can always have access to everything that was resolved. So for example, these are all the settings that we have in Autoconfig, even though the only one we have defined explicitly was this one. Then it goes to validate the model, and at some point we'll print out the full model. So this is everything that JReleaser knows about your project, even though we simply said, hey, I want to use Autoconfig, so thus everything right there, activator or deactivator, whatnot. And then comes here. It's almost the same text that we saw earlier. And we have some others in debug. This is actually the contents of the changelog that was generated using the commit information. We'll see that in just a moment. And that's it. If I were to look into the commits, these are all the commits that I have on the Git repository. I used to have the same ones. And if we look into the generated release changelog, it looks like this. It's just a simple mapping of the hash for that particular commit and the title for now. We can, of course, do better things with the changelog. So if your release was successful, you should be able to go into your repository. And if you do a refresh, you will see that now there's a release that matches the version number. You click that release, there's a tag, there's the content that we saw for the changelog, and that's it. There's nothing more to this. So with this, we can verify, oh, yeah, you can create a Git release for any kind of project. As long as it's hosted on Git, then this should work. Any questions so far? Did anyone get in trouble trying to create a Git release, or let me put it the other way, was everyone successfully be able to create a Git release for the fork repository? Thanks, Erin. Don't be shy. Feel free to ask any questions anytime you want to. Thanks. So that means that we're able to fulfill up to step number 5. Hopefully for everyone. So the next step, what we're going to do is build those binaries. The thing I already did, but I can do it again. So for most of you, that will be Maven W and run verify. And this is just using regular Maven plugins. So what we see here, it compiles the classes, generates a jar. There are no test cases for very trivial application. Generates the jar, and then uses 2 additional Maven plugins, the app assembler, which creates a binary distribution, where there is a bin directory with an executable, a launchable script, and a lib directory that contains all the jars. And then we use the the assembly plugin to create 2 distributions, 2 files, a zip file and a tar file. So if I show you the contents of the target directory, everything created by Maven, we see here, this is the generated by app assembler. And this is the one generated by the assembly plugin, plus the tar file and the zip file. So that's everything that we just did right now, just regular Maven stuff. Okay. So with this now, the instruction said, let's now try to release, or when you can play with the options for the JReleaser release process. So let's see here. What else can we do? We could perhaps change the formatting of the changelog. That's one thing. We could also change the name of the project, and that has to match the name of the repository. So if you use a different name, that would be a little bit weird. We can change the release name. Yeah, let's do that. So we're going to use release name and changelog formatted. Okay. So we go back here and say autoconfig, and then do project version 100. To change or format it, yes. And then say release name. I'm going to choose New York JavaSIG. Let's put this in quotes so that I get how I do this. Let me put it in a different row like this. Oh, that was bad. We should do it like this. Release name. I'm gonna say New York JavaSIG, and I'm going to use the value of the project version. So I could do it just like this, or if I were to use some sort of variables or placeholders, then I could also say something like this, project version. This is a mustache template, which JReleaser accepts in many different places. So if I were to define this way, the project version, I mean the release name, then this value here will eventually be resolved from this setting right here. So it's up to you, you want to duplicate values or not. This is just saying that it's an option. I believe that if we do this right now, we should get a failure. And the reason why we get a failure is because release 100, that tag already exists. So JReleaser does not drop, does not override a specific release unless you tell it to do so. So it tells us that, well, either you set override equals to true or pass it as a parameter. You can set override in the model file, which we're not making use of right now. Or you can also say update, in which case, if there is an existing release, we can change the title, we can change the body, we can append assets. That's what we can do right now. So what I'm going to do is invoke this command and pass the override flag like this. This time should work. There we go. JReleaser is telling us there are more properties or more arguments that we pass as part of the autoconfig section. Okay. And at the end, it says, yeah, it created a release. We have the output property as before. You can inspect the trace log if you want to. And JReleaser was successful in 3.5 seconds in my case. If we navigate to the application, to the release here, notice that the title will be different and that the change will also be different in just a moment. So 1, 2, 3, refresh. And here you go. So the title is different. And now the format of the changelog is a little bit different as well. We have a list of items. The author or authors of each one of those commits will appear here. So for now, it's only myself. In your case, I think you might get also my name in your fork and a list of contributors. There are more things that we could look. So JReleaser-H, some things that we could change, for example. We could, what could we do? We could probably mark that release as a pre-release, as a GitHub thing. Or we can mark it as a draft if you want to. Or, given that we have binaries, we build them with a zip, we built a zip or a tar file, then we can pass those as well. So let's do that. So this is the latest command line that we have. The option is pass a file. Which file? Whatever file you want to. In my case, target, distributions, app, and the zip file. We can also pass the tar file. Just add another entry to files. So that will be target, distribution, app, tar gc. So when we do that, you'll notice that, of course, autoconfig says there are more parameters that were passed to this invocation. And now we see that the checksum is working because we have input files. We didn't configure any signing because we didn't set up PGP So that's fine for now. But if you want to create digital signature, just follow the documentation how you can hook in your own PGP signature, or if you want to use COSA. And then notice that there's an extra output here. When after we create the release, we upload two different assets, the two binaries, and a checksums file that contains the checksums for these two files. You have the option to upload all checksums in a single file, or you can also upload the individual checksums. So we can have a look at the contents of that checksums file. Where is it? In the out JReleaser directory, you'll find that there are two SHAs and there's the checksum file. If we have a look at that particular checksums file, we get this format that you can verify using, in the case of Linux and Mac, I think the command is called shasum. And there is another command that you can use on Windows to verify the checksum for that particular input file. Okay, so I'm going to go to the browser and do a refresh here. The title stays the same as before. The changelog stays the same as before because we didn't change any configuration on that regard. But notice now we have the assets. And if you click any of those, you'll be able to download the asset and then unzip it and then just run the application. So that would have been fulfilling everything that we can do on the first hands-on. Any questions so far on what we have seen with these steps? Okay, a little bit shy. That's all right. Apparently, everything worked fine. I hope that was the second case. As
we do have a question here on YouTube.
Oh, right.
Can we integrate and/or deploy a JReleaser tool into a virtual machine of a hypervisor such as VMware or VMbox?
Yes, the tool can be used anywhere you want to. For now, I'm showcasing the CLI, and you can run it on the three major platforms, Windows, Linux, and Mac. If you use the universal version of the CLI, then you are bound to the specific version of Java for that platform. So if you're running on Linux ARM, or actually anywhere where Java runs, you should be able to run JReleaser. If you also have Git on that particular system, then you shouldn't have any problems at all. There are other ways to run JReleaser as a Maven plugin or as a Gradle plugin. You can also run it in different CI services, GitHub Actions, GitLab CI, Jenkins, or so many other different options, for which we actually, in the documentation side for JReleaser, we do provide information about those services. So if you were to go into the documentation, JReleaser.org, click on continuous integration, then look at, we have guides to 14 different CI solutions. So running inside a VM, not a problem. You can certainly do so. Okay, so the next step is, now we get into the model file, because as you saw, if we were to continue doing releases like this, where we specify so many different options in the command line, and as we continue to grow the project and it produces, I don't know, like 10 different binaries and 10 different assets, that's going to be a lot of trouble, right? Setting up a big command line. So for this case, now we're going to turn into the model. So we now go into hands-on number 2, and your fork should contain a YAML file, JReleaser.yaml. YAML is the default format, but we support 2 additional formats, TOML and JSON. And when we switch into the plugin mode, Maven or Gradle, you should be able to use the Maven DSL or the Gradle DSL. So for now, we're going to stick with the CLI, and we're going to use an external file. So open JReleaser.yaml, and then we're going to look into the different sections in just a moment. So let's go there and do open that file, and it looks like this. So we can appreciate one section called project, where we have some basic metadata about your project. So not just the name that we can get from Git, but also some sort of description. And if you want to have a multi-line description, then use the long description. And a link to your project, the website, a list of authors, a license, very, very important if you're working on open source. The current Java version you may be using for this project. In this case, this project builds with Java 8. And you can pass additional settings as the Maven coordinates. So group ID, artifact ID, and I think what else? There's one more, I can't recall exactly which one it is, but the documentation will tell you. And here now we have a map of custom values for any kind of properties that I want to put. So this value here is any name you want to and any value you want to. These properties will later play a role when you are using templates to generate a Homebrew formula or an email when you make an announcement, or for any other place where templates come into play, such as generating a container image with Docker. The next section we see here is the release section. When we explicitly say we're going to use GitHub, we will override every release we would like to post with JReleaser, so we don't have to specify it in the command line. We also want to sign any tags or commits that JReleaser may do on our behalf. We're also going to make use of an explicit GitHub feature, which is called discussions. Discussions are kind of like a wiki or like a Stack Overflow kind of deal for repositories. And discussions have different categories. This is how we can group topics. There's a default one called announcements, which we're going to use. So just use that. And then we have a series of rules for configuring the changelog, how it looks like. This is the very, very long-winded way to beautify the changelog. There are other ways that we'll see in just a moment how we can make this shorter, or depending on how you want to do it, you can also do it bigger. So the first thing we're saying, each row of the commit will be formatted using this particular expression. So each element will be in a list, and we're using, again, remember those mustache templates. This value here and this value here, these names, we had to pull them from somewhere. And that somewhere, it's found in the documentation. So if I browse to JReleaser and look here into, I believe, is templates. No, it's in the configuration, name templates, right here. This tells me everything that I can use as values in the mustache expression. Somewhere we have here, I think in the builds, or it's in the project. We can search for commit hash. There we go. We can use these things. Or I believe if we go into release and then click on changelog, here it tells me all the different name templates that I can use when formatting the changelog. So commit hash, short hash, and commit title, those are the ones that I'm looking right here. Next, 3 different sections: labelers, categories, and replacers. So what JReleaser is going to do is, for each commit that is going to be processed, it will apply a series of regular expressions on the title or on the body. Right now, these 3 expressions says I'm going to do it on the title. And what this regular expression is saying, well, this is the beginning of the title, so that will be a prefix. If the title matches that prefix, then we're going to apply a label to it. feature, issue, or task. Then what JReleaser is going to do is use these labels, feature, issue, and task, to group them into categories. So for example, there is a features category. You may use emojis or use any kind of characters you want to for the title, and then use the list of labels that belong to that particular category. So that's how we have features, issues, and tasks. And finally, once the whole changelog has been created, but before it's written to disk, we have the choice to change the text or replace the text. We have 3 regular expressions matching the prefixes again. And there are 2 properties for each replacer. One of them is search, the regular expression, and the other one is replace, whose default value is an empty string. That's why we don't see it here. The end result by having the empty string is that with each one of these expressions, what we're going to do is remove the prefix from the changelog. But if you want to say, instead of using removing, want to apply a emoji for feature or for fix for chore, then just add a replace property and put the content that you want to be replaced. Next up, 3 other sections. In my case, I want to sign. In your case, given that you have not configured signing, I would recommend you to edit the file and write never instead of always. If you leave it as always without passing a signature, I should have added this into the instructions, you will get a failure. JReleaser will tell you, you asked me to sign something, but I don't have enough configuration for it. So for the time being, make sure to edit the file and put never here. We also would like to create a Homebrew formula. And finally, we have the list of those 2 artifacts that we pass explicit in the command line, and we see them in the configuration file. You can use the names, the full location for the path if you want to, or you can also use mustache templates. This distribution name matches what is found here. This is the name of the distribution. Of course, it doesn't make a lot of sense when this value has 3 letters and this one is longer, but as you continue changing things, it might be easier to just use the variable. And the project version that we saw earlier before, this will be resolved from the input that we passed in. Okay. So what the instruction tells us now to do is, this is a typo there. We have built the binaries with Maven Verify. And then the next step will be to configure the project version. We can do it this way. Either, if you're on Linux and Mac, this is the easiest way. Export JReleaser version equals 000. If you're on Windows, then you'll have to change your environment settings and then restart your shell. Or if you want to, you can add a version here. It's up to you. And if you're on Linux and Mac, you can also this way. So if you were to put the version number explicitly, when you want to release a new version, then you have to be sure to update this value to something else. Because if you do not, you will keep releasing version 100. So for that reason, I'm going to delete it. And I have this JReleaser project version 100. Should work. How can we tell? We can ask JReleaser to print out the configuration. You invoke the JReleaser config command. And this tells me it's a similar log that we saw earlier. Yeah, it's reading my magic settings or my secret settings from this location. So the project version continues to be 100. This is the current time. Last hash, what is the platform? And now we see that metadata that we wrote in the configuration file now being taken into account. So that's the name of the project, and that's the right version. Currently using semantic versioning because JReleaser supports 5 different version schemes, semantic version being perhaps one of the most well-known, but there are others. It's not a snapshot because the version number does not match this regular expression. What else does it know? Notice that we say license is Apache 2.0. If we happen to use a well-known SPDX identifier, then JReleaser can infer the license URL that may be used by other package managers. If it's not an SPDX identifier, you may need to configure an explicit value for license URL. And notice that the copyright owner is right there because of the author. And what else we see here? Here we go. This is everything that JReleaser knows about the project version. There's Java. Here's the release, the GitHub release section, which remember, we only configure a few things, but JReleaser knows more about the project. So that's pretty good. Here comes the settings for the changelog. Okay, so that's how this thing gets resolved. What else can we see? Yeah, we're going to generate checksums using SHA-256 as default. You can add more if you want to. In my case, signing is enabled. In your case, this should be seen as false in red, and all these features disabled. We configured Homebrew packager, so it's going to use this commit author because we're going to push a commit to a Git repository. You can change these values, obviously. Just have to put it in the configuration file. The repository that will be created has to have this name, Homebrew, that is a given, and this value is whatever you want to, but this is the default. Will be posted, in my case, on my owner, my account, which is Almiray. In your case, should be something else. The default tag, when we push to the Homebrew repository, matches whatever tag we have put into our main repository, but you can change it if you want to. And finally, this Java distribution is a type Java binary by default. The name, the two artifacts, and the settings that we pass on Homebrew, which were, let's say, like a global level, are also inherited by the distribution. So if you were to have multiple distributions, you can have multiple Homebrew formulas with different values. Some of those values may be at the global level and may be defined there, and there may be explicit values for each one distribution. So in this case, the global and the local values pretty much match the same. So far, so good? Okay. So the instruction says now, let's make a full release. So I'm assuming that when you create your GitHub token, your personal GitHub access token, that you gave it the full permissions for read and write. So you click on the checkbox for repo, and that will allow you to not only push a release to your current project, but to another repository that you own, that you have access to that one. So what we want to do now is create, again, the release and the Homebrew formula. We can issue this command, JReleaser full release. This, by default, will read your configuration file, whose default value happens to be JReleaser.yaml. If you were to use TOML or JSON formats, it will also pick it up automatically. So as long as you're using the default name for the file, you don't have to specify it. So with just JReleaser full release and our current configuration, remember to make sure to edit the sign section to never, making sure that it's active is never. Then you should do this. What happens now, you'll see that there's no autoconfig section at the top because we're using the full model. We see similar settings as earlier, reading the secrets and the timestamp and the project version, the hash and all that. And notice that, well, it continues to generate the changelog. It also generates the checksums again for the binaries. Then in my case, it does generate the digital signatures because I do have the signature check settings correctly set up. And then it will upload binaries as we saw earlier, the checksums, in my case, the signatures. And once it's done with this, it will create a Homebrew formula, which is just a regular Groovy file. And in the end, it will push it to that repository. So let's inspect what JReleaser did for us. So that will be looking into the JReleaser directory. We saw earlier there's the checksums, okay. Now we have these two additional directories, package, prepare. And we also have, in my case, signatures. The formula that was generated is found right here. So let's have a look at that one. We do a cat into out JReleaser prepare app brew formula app RB. It's just a regular Ruby file. It's a standard Homebrew formula where we see that there is information coming from that project metadata, sample application. Here's the URL, even with that typo that I have on the model file, is the right version. That's the URL that has been published as a binary asset, and that's the content of the checksums. And what else we see? There's a license. This is a regular Java application that requires Java, so by default it depends on OpenJDK. Which version? 8. Where is this 8 coming from? The model file. And this particular application is able, I think, to react to the -- version, so you can do a test. If this test were to be broken, or you need some other kind of test, or you need to have a light check block, or all the instructions during the install, then you can generate your own template. You can instruct JReleaser to generate a template for this particular package or Homebrew, and then you can do all kinds of edits. Okay, if we are able to finish this step, we were successful with this, we go back to our release page that we see here. Then I go and do a refresh on the browser. We're back to the title that we had before, because that's the default coming from the model. But notice that the changelog looks differently now. We have the 3 different categories. Each element is formatted differently. The prefixes are gone. We have one commit that did not have prefix, so that's why it appears in a separate category, unnamed or uncategorized category, if I may. And the contributor appears like this, and then we get the different assets. Because we're on GitHub and we say we want to link to our discussion category, notice that here at the bottom there is a link here, join discussion. We click on that one. And GitHub navigates to the discussion tab now in the announcements category, where we see there's a link to that announcement. So now you can react to it, you say, yay, finally, and input whatever text you want to. Say, from New York JavaSIG. Here we go.
With just the repo permissions, you're not allowed to create that announcement.
Oh, right. We needed the one for discussions.
We need the one for the new one for discussions.
You're absolutely right.
So it's 3 from the bottom, right? Discussion, read discussion.
This one.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you very much for that. I completely forgot about the discussions link.
Yep. And there was one other thing in the config file. When we set the signing to false, when I ran config, it also complained because there's also in the GitHub section,
yes,
there is a sign that was still true or enabled or something. I can't remember what it was.
Right.
And that sign has to also be false.
So this has to be false.
Correct.
And this has to be never.
Never. Right.
Right. So when we do JReleaser config, she'll display what it knows about our project. And let's look first into release. Says somewhere there should be a sign false. So that's good. And then the sign section, there is no sign section for you because it's now disabled. Shouldn't be visible. But you remember the trace log, right? Now there is a trace log. Here, we see that sign in their GitHub blog continues to be false. That's good. And then we continue going down. You should see signing enable equals false because active is never. You should see something like this. This is how we can tell if the settings were correct or not. So thank you very much for that, Darren. But because we were not able to post to, because you have a token that did not have discussions enabled. You should have seen a warning, I think, in the evaluation of the invocation of JReleaser.
Correct. And I've re-enabled it and I still don't get the announcement. Or I've enabled it. I'm still getting a could not update release with discussion categories announcements as a warn. Correct.
Okay, but the release doesn't fail.
Release does not fail. No, it continues on.
Right. So the next thing that we'll be wondering is if you have these permissions in your token, then the next thing will be check if you have discussions enabled in your repo, which I believe you need to manually enable as well before we do this.
Probably. So here.
Yes. So
yeah.
we go into
don't
the
even have them.
settings of the project. And let's see, where is it? It's not GitHub Acts. I think, oh yes, somewhere
What's it?
down here.
It's, yeah,
Obviously.
scroll to the bottom right there.
There we go.
Yep.
This checkbox has to be ticked as well. And I believe that will force you to create a first discussion. And the announcements category should be created by default. If it's not,
I didn't even have to start the discussion. All I had to do was just enable it, but I never had to click on. Yep.
Okay, I think in the past, whenever you tick here, it will move you to the discussions tab and say, hey, welcome to a new discussion.
Yep.
So create an initial topic. I think that they changed recently.
Yeah, you don't have to do that. Just check the box. It dumps you over there, but you don't have to click on start discussion. It's just
right.
Just that one checkbox. Okay, cool.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
A few things that I forgot, but it's a good thing that now we can tell that if JReleaser had failed, it will tell you, when like he told you that, oh, well, yes, you want to sign commits, but you didn't give me information for signing. So fix that, activate one or disable the other. So that will be, oh, it's another typo, Homebrew formula. So what else happened here? We created our application. This is not it. This is the application right here. And if I navigate to Homebrew tab, should have been created automatically for you by JReleaser. Or if you have a Homebrew tab direct repository already, you will just reuse it for you. So you should get something like this. It has a default README, and inside the form, and if you happen to have a license file, which you have in this project, then it will also be added. So it's an important thing that we always activate the license. And you go into formula, there should be a formula file that matches what we saw in our local environment. And if you happen to use Homebrew installed in your system, we can follow these instructions. So we can do brew install your username, tab, the name of the formula. In this case will be app, or you can do it in 2 steps. I think my Homebrew formula, it's broken. I can give it a try. So I can say this. I did not run Homebrew in 2 weeks, so I may need to update. This will take a moment to work. We'll figure it out. By the way, this name here, tab, matches what we see here. So if you were to use a different word, you say Homebrew tool or Homebrew tools, then tools should be used here instead. And same goes here. Yeah, Homebrew is going to take a while. So I have plenty of things installed via Homebrew. And yeah, something error. Yeah, I made a mistake somewhere. This is still using a very old version of that particular tab. Maybe I can force it and by saying, you know what? Let's delete that. I know it's ugly. I can give it another try. There we go. It's doing something weird, downloading other things. Well, that's how Homebrew works. And I got that app now. It's almost done. I didn't have OpenJDK using Homebrew, So it's downloading that. So downloads all dependencies. That's the advantage of using a package manager to resolve all the different dependencies. And what else this thing is doing? Updating some other packages. This is one of the things that I dislike about Homebrew is that when you just want to install one thing, you will figure out, I need to update other things, even though you don't need them for this particular task at hand. But, well, what can you do? Other package managers don't have this. Anyway, it will eventually finish at some point because it's downloading a few things.
If this were a cooking show, then we'd have this prepared right out of the oven, but.
Yeah, I should have been mindful of this and updated my Homebrew before I jump into the workshop.
Nah, don't worry about
it. But hey, we're live. This is how we roll, right? We test in production. Okay, so that will continue to go for a moment. Fine. What else can we do? Oh, another typo. That was it. Just trying to install the Homebrew formula if you happen to be using Homebrew. What else could we do? Alternatively, we could edit that JReleaser YAML file and play around with the options. Say, for example, you want to use a different labeler, you have a different commit convention in the messages, or you want to match the bodies, you want to have different categories, or use a completely different replacer. Yeah, all those things can work. Or maybe you would like to play around with the other package managers, such, for example, instead of Homebrew or additional to Homebrew, you could also create a scoop package or a scoop manifest. That's very easy. Just add a scoop and then make it active always. And it will take all the defaults from your project based on the metadata, and should create a manifest for scoop. In the end result, there will be a scoop repository under your username that you can use to install on Windows. And you can use the other package managers, the JBank or Snapcraft. For Chocolatey, you need an account in the Chocolatey community website, which of course is more elaborate than we could do today. But if you already happen to have one of those, hooking it up with JReleaser is not much of a problem. It's really straightforward. Yeah, this is still going on. How are we doing so far? I hope that most of you are able to fulfill this second hands-on. It's all using the CLI. Now we're going to jump to the last one. I hope that you are comfortable with Maven. And what this thing is doing is that instead of using Maven, instead of using the CLI, we're going to use the JReleaser Maven plugin. So if I have the POM file, now this is not the POM file, this is the same instructions. Are we done yet? No, I'm gonna move into another shell. Where I have this? Yeah, GitHub. No. Oh, we're already there. Silly me. Let's edit the POM file. This one. I'm gonna make it bigger so we can tell. And let's see, just regular Maven instructions. And here, you're gonna put it at the top, plugins. I'm gonna add that JReleaser plugin right there. We're going to use the latest version. And I'm not going to add any of the settings whatsoever. So I'm gonna make sure that JReleaser uses all the defaults that are coming from the project. Defaults such as the author, the license, which matches the SPDX identifier that we saw earlier, the current version of Java, the main class, I believe, is also going to take into account, and these settings as well, which will be useful for the package manager, for Homebrew, for Scoop, and the others. And of course, these values will also be used. This is the actual project version that we will be using right now. Again, we'll match 100. So just by pasting this configuration in your POM file, you should be able to run JReleaser from within Maven. This thing finished? Yes. So we'll come back to the Homebrew in a moment, because now we're on the third step. So we can ask Maven W, I think that I did verify just in case. That's not the thing. Just making sure that I have the binaries in place. Yeah, everything is good. Now I can ask Maven to print out the configuration for JReleaser using the JReleaser plugin and the config go. And that results in a printout very similar to what we saw earlier when we invoked it in the CLI. We have the name of the project, the version number. It's again semantic versioning. Now we have a different website because this is coming from the POM file. There is no longer that typo. What else does JReleaser know? We're going to release to GitHub. This is information, again, is coming from the Git metadata. And the token, everything else, that's fine. Signature is false. And we're going to have checksums, and there are no binaries. There are no signatures. There's no Homebrew. Why? Because again, the only thing that we did here was configure JReleaser with the plain defaults. So the next thing that we can do is ask Maven W, to do a full release, or just a release if you want to. The names of the goals match the names of the commands that you have from JReleaser. If you want to know more about those different options, then we can go into documentation side, click on tools. In this case now, let's go into JReleaser Maven plugin. And well, this should have been updated 100. And here the list of all the different goals that we can invoke from Maven. So there's the full release and sign and checksum and release and the others. With match, the same values that we saw from the command line. And we happen to be running Gradle, then the names of the goals are similar. It's just that it follows a different convention. Uses JReleaser as a prefix just in case that someone were to have a different task that matches this name. So this way we are kind of like namespaced the different goals. Okay. So here we go. We go back to Maven JReleaser full release. And given that we have our GitHub token in the secrets file, just invoke Maven and let's see what happens. We got an error. Remember that we encountered this error before? Because the release 100 already exists. How can we fix this? We could manually delete the release from the GitHub UI. Or in this case, we tell JReleaser, let's do the overwrite that particular release. So what we have to do, configuration, this is standard Maven. We're going to configure the plugin. Then the next thing is we open the JReleaser block. This is the model. And then the next thing is the release block as we saw in YAML. All right. And then we have to say GitHub because we're releasing to GitHub. Okay. And then finally, we can say override equals true. There we go. This is the long way to specify that we want to override. I think you can specify this property as a command line option. We can see here in release, I think. Yeah. And override should be visible somewhere. Oh, actually, it's not there. That's a mistake. The override property should be visible in some property like this. Yeah, I guess we found a missing feature that should be added at a later point. It's either this is either the help is missing or the setting is missing. Okay, I will figure out that later. So for now, we're going to do it explicitly just by adding this piece of information. So again, just standard plugin configuration, and there is a JReleaser block, release, GitHub, override equals true. Once we have this, we do once again run Maven. And now it works. And because we didn't have any other settings, the change should back to the plain version, and there are no assets. So when we browse to our release here into app, you browse into your repository, click on release and look again. Default title, default settings for the changelog, no assets. Because this time we release from Maven with the plain configuration. And just like that, you can add as many customizations as you want to using the Maven DSL. Say, if we were to browse to the documentation, into the configuration section, say that if we wanted to configure an artifact, the zip file, then you can browse into distributions and click on Maven. And this tells you the settings that we have to add for configuring those zip files. If you were to do that in YAML, just click on the different tabs here. Every snippet of configuration that is found in this website uses the 5 different formats. So it's easy to switch from one to another. So in our case, we had to have a distributions block and then give it any name you want to. So let's do that. Let's add distributions. Should probably be using IntelliJ to have a much smarter XML editing experience. And then we can add any name, such as NYJavaSIG. Right. And then the next thing we have to do is list the artifacts. For each one of the artifacts, we say artifact. So this is a standard Maven list. And what do we need for the artifact? We need a path. And the path will be target, distributions, app. We're going to have a project version and eventually zip. Now, the project version, you can find it from different places. You can use the JReleaser mustache template. And this will be resolved as latest as possible. Or you can use the Maven variables project version, which will be resolved eagerly because Maven has to resolve all the references first and then continues with the execution. So it's up to you. As a matter of fact, if you want to, I think you can have project build directory like this, which should resolve to target, and use the JReleaser mustache templates for project version. So you can mix them both if you want to. It's going to stick with target here. And as you saw in the YAML file, we used to use a distribution name, but of course, the name of our zip file does not have NYJavaSIG. So now this is can we tell him, yeah, the name of the distribution is one thing, but the file name is different. So this should be good to go. Now let's see again, JReleaser config. Let's see what JReleaser knows our distribution if it's successfully configured. Yes, it is. There's the name of the distribution, and then is the zip file. Good. Let's do a full release again, but let's do it in dry run mode. I think the property is called JReleaser.dry.run equals true. This will verify that we can create a release, but of course, it's not going to actually do it. Let's see. Is this working properly? Calculates the checksum. So it found the zip file. That's good. No signatures. And there's the asset. Apparently, everything is good to go. There's no packager. So that's why we got all these things empty. All right. This is looking good. So now we can do it for real. Let's do a full release. And we will get the default changelog, the default title, but we should see one asset. So navigate to a release and do a refresh. And default title, default changelog, and the binary asset plus the checksum, which will always be updated, uploaded, unless you configure JReleaser to never upload checksums or to never calculate checksums if you want to. So that takes care of this particular hands-on section. If you want to, you can have a look at the JReleaser YAML file and configure the changelog, and with labelers and categories and whatnot. Here's one shortcut that I can show you. Now that we have this section here, we can say changelog. If I type it correctly, like this, changelog. And if we look at JReleaser YAML, it says in the changelog, we have to say formatted always. So we use that one. So that will be formatted always. If you may be wondering what the other values are available here, you can say never. So it's disabled. You can say snapshot, which means whenever your project is deemed a snapshot version, then that thing will be activated. Or you can also say release. So when your version is a release version, in this case 1.0.0, the option will be activated. If it happens to be a snapshot, then it won't be activated. In this case, we want to be active every single time. And the other thing that we can set is preset. We say preset conventional commits, which happens to be a specification of how we write messages. If you Google for conventional commits, you'll eventually find this page, conventionalcommits.org, which explains what is the specification for the commits. It's not really that difficult. This is quite simple. And once you follow it, which this project does by using these prefixes, then when I generate the release again, or just the changelog if you want to do it locally, whoa, something wrong here. Oops, yes, wrong thing. That's where we use IntelliJ. That's where we use IDEs, so that I can catch these errors early. There we go. So now this will work. And generates the changelog, and of course pushes to GitHub once again. And we do now a refresh. And boom, I just got categories. Just one single configuration because I'm following the presets. Much easier than configuring labelers and categories. So you get that, that flexibility. There is another preset, which is called Gitmoji. You use emojis as the first element in your title or in the body, and that will also apply to different categories. So it's up to you if you want to use conventional commits, Gitmoji, or your own conventions. And I think that covers the everything that we're going to do today at the workshop. If you want to use Gradle, then it's a matter of configuring the Gradle plugin, which is available from the Gradle plugin portal. Just search for JReleaser, so that is available here. Plugins.gradle.org, which for some reason it's taking a while to resolve here. But it's also visible in documentation here if we go into tools, Gradle plugin. It's just as easy as configuring the ID or JReleaser and the given version. For some reason, this documentation site has not been fully updated, but I will take care of that. And if you search here for JReleaser, Should be there in a moment. My connection is quite slow right now for some odd reason. There we go.
Everything.
So that's the latest version.
This time of night.
Yeah, I guess it's telling me that it's time to wrap up. Oh, one more thing that I wanted to show that this is actually the Homebrew formula worked. Looks like install something, right? So we should say which app it's there, user local bin app. So I should be able to invoke just app, right? Hello world, I install a binary published via JReleaser using Homebrew on my local machine. And just like that, every other user of your project will be able to do the same thing if you happen to publish to Homebrew or Scoop or Snowcraft, SDKman, or every other package manager supported by JReleaser. All right. Any questions that you may have?
Well, I'll keep my eye on the chat in YouTube and in Zoom. I have just two brief questions. One of them is, what other software would you compare JReleaser to? What's the closest in functionality, and how does it compare with JReleaser?
The closest one is actually called GoReleaser. This is one of the inspirations, not just the name, but the behavior. You may have noticed that when I was building my project, sometimes I was using, oh, I did tell you about GUM, right? GUM is a project built with Go. And I have the same problem with other projects with Java, which is once you build it, how do you deliver it to consumers? Well, that is done via GoReleaser. GoReleaser builds with multiple platforms, and it can also create checksums and signatures and a Git release and Homebrew packager and so many other things. So GoReleaser is it was used as a template of the ideas for JReleaser. There is another project called JBank. If you haven't seen it before, you should have a look at it. It's a Java command line tool that allows you to launch source files with dependencies. If you've seen this before, you probably know what Groovy does with the @grab annotation. But you can do this with Java, and it has edit support. You can launch jars. It has many, many different things. The author of JBank, Max Anderson, did everything that I showed you today with JReleaser by hand. In the end, he and I were talking, and we ended up having this idea: what if there were something like GoReleaser, but for Java? And what if this tool were to learn from all the lessons taken or found by JBank, so that the user experience that you have as a Java developer will be much, much better? That's how JReleaser came to be. So we have JBank and GoReleaser as inspirations for JReleaser.
Nice. My other question, as I confessed before, because I'm so busy managing the stream, I don't get to try these things while the workshops are going on. So since I will be trying it tomorrow, I hope, if not, maybe over the weekend, what advice would you give me? What's the point where I might get stuck? What's the most touchy and tricky part here that I should watch out for, and what should I do when I encounter it?
Right. One of the trickiest part, especially in a Maven multi-project or a Gradle multi-project, is if the project that you want to release happens to be a sub-module or a sub-project. JReleaser expects the project that you have configured to be at the root of the Git directory. If that were not to be the case, then you have to configure an additional property, Git root search. This is the way that you do it in Gradle, but there's a way to do it in Maven, and there's another way to do it in the CLI. So you have to watch out for those. There's actually, a matter of fact, there's a checklist item here in the documentation side that says, well, once you have configured JReleaser, watch out for these issues. So make sure if you want to use a different remote name other than origin. I know there are a few people that like to use a different name. So use this, or make sure that the default branch is main. If you use a different name, You have to explicitly configure it or use an environmental variable. Here's the thing about the Git root search I was telling you about. If your project is not at the root of the Git directory, then activate this property. We use semantic versioning by default. If you want to use a different scheme, which we support 5, then use that. The default tag format uses v and then value. If you want to use a different value, then set it up. We tag releases by default. If you have a different release mechanism where you explicitly tag, you can tell JReleaser to skip the tag so it doesn't re-tag. The default type for distributions are binary, where you have different distribution types. Binaries for any kind of projects such as Rust or Perl or Python. If you're working with Go, I'll continue to say every single time, stick with Go Releaser. It has explicit support for Go. But for any kind of project, use JReleaser. Custom Java runtimes with JLink. Native images with Gradle VM. Native installers using JPackage or any of these extensions that you may create outside of JReleaser. Or single jars or Uber jars, fat jars are also supported. So all are the kinds of distributions that you configure, but the default one is Java binary. Tells you about the dry run. So definitely use config as many times as possible to figure out that if your configuration is correct. Do a release using dry run mode to figure out that the things are actually going to work. And when you're done, then just take out the dry run flag as I just showed you, and then that should do the thing. If anything were to go wrong, always be sure to read out the contents of the output properties or the trace log where you have everything that JReleaser did. If there are any exceptions and there are any stack traces, then they will be found in that trace log. Once, if you find a bug, then just go into JReleaser's Git repository. There is a, let's see where this thing goes. GitHub JReleaser, go into issues and create a new issue and file a ticket right here. And we have a template that tells you, did you provide steps to reproduce the problem? Do you have a stack trace, which is going to come from that trace log file? And if you follow the steps, like, yeah, you should be good to go on how we're able to, from our side, reproduce the problem and most likely successfully be able to give you a solution for that problem.
So, okay, wow. Thank you very much. I'm going to get right on it.
Yeah.
This weekend, what?
Going to install first to find the best way that you can install the tool. Some of the things we saw today.
Yeah, yeah.
Then go into quick start for which version you want to go. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
And
no,
depending on the things that you want to configure inside the JReleaser block that is found right here, you will have to go into configuration and find the block that you want to configure. You can find it here or you can search for it. And before you make your first release, be sure to go through the checklist.
all right. The checklist sounds like an extremely valuable piece of
Yeah,
work.
and there is a fact, at least this is the exception that happens if you get something like this. That means that you are not at the Git root search.
All right.
You are not at the root.
Andres, thank you so much for doing this. What time is it where you are now?
It's almost 2:30.
In the morning.
Thursday in the
Yeah,
morning.
Okay, all right. I'm going to let you go if you like. We're going to have a brief raffle here. I promised a raffle for IntelliJ, but we don't need to keep you awake for that. So if you want to sign off, then that'll be fine. And I'll do the raffle here and we'll give away some stuff. Anyway, again, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Barry, for the opportunity, and everyone else that participated in this workshop and through the recording as well. Know that you can reach me very, very easily. There are many places. Of course, you can reach me through GitHub. You can reach me to Twitter if there is more information that you would like to know about the tool or how this thing is built. Obviously, JReleaser uses JReleaser itself to create its own releases, which happens to be one of the examples that you see here. You click on this one, and this is the latest version of the release project. I mean, it's almost the latest version, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a lot of configuration. Why? because you saw that JReleaser has many different ways to be installed. And most of those, the versions of how you can install it are managed through a single configuration file, which is the one that you see here. In the end, Gradle builds 4 binaries, and JReleaser assembles others, like the standalone versions and installers, and eventually GroundVM natives, checksums, and a bunch of signatures, and updates a lot of different websites or Git repositories because of the different package managers. So everything, all those things, which sounds a little bit complicated right now, is just because JReleaser tries to publish to as many different places as possible. Your project itself may not require all these settings, but if it does, then looking at how JReleaser does it may give you a clue of how it can be done for your project.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right.
And let's raffle off some software. Who is here and who is interested in the raffle? Give me a thumbs up on the
emojis.
Yeah, on the emojis, yeah. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. I'm going to go switch to the share screen here. And there it is.
Oh, we lost Darren.
So there's our famous spinning wheel. And if you're interested in the raffle, then in the chat, I invite you to type a number from 0 to 29, and the winner is the person who gets closest to the spin, mod 30.
I suppose we have viewers on YouTube, right?
We have viewers on YouTube, and I'm going to wait to see if you're live viewing on YouTube, meaning if you're on YouTube and you're watching this while it's being presented live, then feel free to join the raffle. We have to wait 20 seconds or so for people to chime in. So type a number in the chat, either in YouTube or in Zoom, and we'll go to town here. Okay, I see numbers coming in.
Are you going to choose the number closest up or closest down? So ceiling or floor?
In case of a tie, we're going to have a quiz on horse grooming habits from medieval Europe between 1502 and 1695. All right, I think it's time for us to roll. Are you ready? Here we go. You see the wheel, right?
Yes.
All right, yep, boom. And I got some music to go along with it. Eight, and the winner is Mohammed Tekaya. I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name. Mohammed, will you please send email to info@javasig.com. info@javasig.com. Let us know what your email address is, and we can send you the ticket for a year's worth of free IntelliJ license. And the only qualification is that you must use it. Well, you must use it, of course, but you must redeem it within the next month and a half, something like that. We trust you. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. Thank you again, Andres. Thank you for our participants. Thank you to Zoom. Thank you to YouTube. Thank you to New York JavaSIG. Thank you to the Academy. We'll be seeing you soon at our next New York JavaSIG meeting. Good night.
Good night, everyone.